If you go back thousands of years to the land of Canaan, survival meant constant movement. Families lived as nomadic herdsmen, traveling daily to find grazing land and water for their sheep and goats. And one of these families, the father, Jacob, openly played favorites. Out of his 12 sons, he clearly preferred 17-year-old Joseph, a child born to him late in his life. Jacob made this preference entirely public by giving Joseph an ornate, highly specialized robe. This garment stood out heavily against the rough, practical clothes his older brothers wore while tending flocks in the dirt and heat. When the older brothers saw this undeniable physical proof of their father's preference, resentment took hold. They hated Joseph entirely, to the point that they could not even bring themselves to speak a kind word to him. In a harsh outdoor environment where everyone needs to rely on each other to survive, a parent playing favorites causes deep damage. It creates silent, dangerous fractures within the working unit. Then, Joseph had a dream. He told his brothers that they were all binding sheaves of grain out in the field. Suddenly, his sheaf stood completely upright, while all of their sheaves gathered around his and bowed down to the ground. His brothers immediately understood the meaning, asking if he actually intended to rule over them. Undeterred, Joseph shared a second dream. He announced that this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were all bowing down to him. This time, even his father intervened. Jacob publicly rebuked Joseph, asking if the entire family were actually going to bow down before him. Privately, though, Jacob kept the matter in mind. These claims of authority redefined the camp's dynamic. By repeatedly implying he would rule over his brothers, Joseph became a direct threat to the family hierarchy. Sometime later, the brothers took the flocks to graze near Shechem. Distance strips away safety. The moment Joseph stepped outside the protective radius of his father's camp, the brothers took their simmering hatred and weaponized it into violence. The oldest brother, Reuben, heard the plot and tried to intervene. Hoping to eventually rescue Joseph and return him to Jacob, Reuben convinced the brothers not to shed blood directly, but instead to throw him alive into a deep wilderness pit. When Joseph reached them, the brothers attacked. They grabbed him and violently stripped him of his robe, pulling away the symbol of their father's favor. Then they threw him down into an empty, waterless cistern, trapping him in the darkness below. With their brother trapped in a hole in the ground, they simply sat down nearby to eat their meal. While eating, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelite and Midianite merchants heading down toward Egypt. Seeing an opportunity, Judah argued that rather than covering up a murder, they should sell Joseph. The brothers agreed, hauled him out of the pit, and traded him to the merchants for 20 shekels of silver. They bartered away their own flesh and blood for a handful of coins. This cold economic transaction severed their closest family ties to satisfy their own envy. Reuben, who was absent during the sale, returned to the cistern to carry out his rescue. Finding the pit completely empty, he tore his clothes in despair and panic. Now missing their brother, the siblings needed an alibi. They took the ornate robe they had stripped from Joseph, slaughtered a goat, and soaked the fabric in the animal's blood. They carried the ruined garment back to Hebron, presenting it to Jacob. They coldly asked him to examine it, to see whether it was his son's robe. Jacob recognized it instantly. He concluded exactly what they wanted him to, that a wild animal had torn Joseph to pieces. Jacob tore his own clothes, put on sackcloth, and refused all comfort from his family, vowing to mourn until his grave. The sons used the very item Jacob had made out of love to completely destroy him. The ornate robe was weaponized to inflict an irreparable, permanent grief upon their father. But while Jacob wept in the tents of Canaan, hundreds of miles away, the Midianite merchants arrived in the sprawling empire of Egypt. There, they took their captive and sold him to Potiphar, a high-ranking official and captain of Pharaoh's guard. This transaction appeared to be the miserable end of a favored son's life. Instead, his brothers had unknowingly placed him directly into the political epicenter of an ancient superpower, anchoring him exactly where a much larger historical narrative would soon unfold.